All right, thank you very much. Well, I know that everyone has had a long day considering I'm the last presenter on the list. And I actually love the last spot because the people that are here are the diehards, the ones that are really serious. And the other advantage is that no matter what I say, no presenter after me is going to second guess or deny, disagree with me. So I like the last spot. And my job with this session is to make it worthwhile, to make it relevant, and to make it worth staying for. Now, I can't give you an ICS course in just 45 minutes. There's just too much to put in. But what I'd like to do is just give you a little bit of a theory, especially with the Canadian ICS. And I'm going to take a look at two applications of ICS that you might run into. And then we'll take a look at understanding ICS in disasters. So, as mentioned, I work for the Alberta Emergency Management Agency. I'm the senior ICS consultant, which means I get to deal with all sorts of different ICS problems. I'm a senior instructor in the province. I do instructor training, and as a matter of fact, I've done about half the instructors across Canada have gone through my Train the Trainer courses. And so I've dealt with several hundred people there. I've also presented a lot on emergency management. I have a passion and talk about a number of different topics there. So obviously the use of the incident command system, but at previous communication academies, I've talked about communication failures in disasters, the characteristics of disasters, the failure of lessons learned, and even taking a look at exercise design. So I'll be bringing a few of those different aspects into the presentation as well. On a personal note, this picture is down in High River. This is the costliest and worst flood in Canadian history in 2013. I was the acting field officer on site. I have dealt with quite a number of Type 2 and Type 1 incidents in various roles, either at the Provincial Operations Center, which would be the equivalent of a state operations center, or out in the field. And Alberta seems to give me a lot of practice. We've had 5 out of the 10 worst natural disasters in Canadian history in terms of cost and impacts. As well, just last year, 2020, we had the top 1, 2, and 3 weather disasters for Canada. So I get a lot of chance to practice ICS. Now, this is a picture of Communications Academy in previous years. As mentioned, I have had a chance to talk in other years at the Academy, and I miss driving down. It's only 1,000 miles to drive down to Washington State and enjoy the presentations. And I don't think you really realize until you've been to a number of these presentations and get around across North America how much value there is to Comm Academy. And so I'd like to give a shout out to Marina Zoitel and the organizing committee this year, because many of the presenters are world class, and much of the information is available in the archives, so you can go back. Not all the presentations are there, and one that I would like to specifically mention was when I was in a previous career and attended one of my first Comm Academy presentations. It was with William Loki, who was with FEMA at the time. And he gave such a great presentation that I still use some of the comments that he made in that presentation in my day-to-day response activities, my day-to-day incident command activities, and in my writing on emergency management. And so what we've got here is just a truly world-class chance to learn from some of the best. Now, when we take a look at ICS, one of the things that you need to start with is just understanding ICS itself. And I'm assuming that everyone has got an ICS 100 and 200 course. If you don't, you're going to need to get that. But it's becoming more and more common for people to have ICS 100, 200. Most of my teaching is at the 300, 400, and position specific level, as well as train the trainers. And one of the first things we need to take a look at, you see the little Canadian maple leaf flag behind the ICS here, is that ICS Canada has got a couple of quirky differences that make it just a touch different. And one of the things, for example, is we have standardized vest colors right across the country. Any organization using ICS Canada has the same vest colors. That has made a huge difference just walking into an incident, and right away you see the logistics yellow, you know where the communications unit will be found. We don't put too much emphasis on the public information officer. We have an information officer because if ICS wanted a media officer, we would have called it a media officer and made them a media officer. So there's one of my pet peeves. But one of the key things with us is just starting off with what is the problem. When I arrive on scene, I try to understand two things. What is the problem? Why are we here? What do we have to deal with? And the second one that comes up is whose problem is it? Because just because you've got a problem on an incident doesn't mean that it's your problem. And we need to avoid mission creep because let me tell you, in the middle of an emergency or disaster, there will be more than enough problems to go around. And a lot of people will thrust problems on you and say, fix it, when it's not even your problem. So I'm always starting off with a very simple question. What is the problem? Why are we here? And whose problem is it? So one of the differences with Canada is the use of P-Post. This is going to be very similar to what is used with FEMA in the United States. You're going to recognize objectives, strategies, and tactics. But with Canada, we add in the priorities and problems. And this really makes a big difference in terms of how we describe our ICS and the common understanding of why we're here. So it starts off with the three priorities: life safety, incident stabilization, property, and environmental conservation. Those priorities are the same in Canada and the United States, but they are different around the world. Different countries have different priorities, and that's one of the first things that I want to point out when I work with instructors is it is society that sets the priorities, not ICS or not the government. It is society that sets the priorities, which explains why priorities may change over time or may change within an incident, because the society that you're dealing with may set other priorities. Second of all are the problems. And boy, oh boy, I've got problems. Everyone's got problems, right? But we need to confine it to what are the incident problems. And the incident problems are going to be the threats to the priorities. And this is very important to understand, because this is why you must be here. Is society says that the priorities exist at all time, before, during, and after an incident, but the response is triggered when you have a threat to one of those priorities. And the threat to the priority demands a response, and it demands a solution, which means that we need to come up with objectives. And a lot of people get so wrapped up in objectives and trying to figure out what the objectives are and so on. In Canada, we keep it very simple. It's the simple solution to an incident problem. Not all problems, just incident problems. So if you've got a fire, well, a fire in the middle of the Northwest Territories isn't much of a problem because it's not threatening life safety. There are no people up there. In many areas, it's not unstable. Fire happens every year, and it isn't threatening property because there's no property there, and it's actually helping the environmental conservation because it's restoring the forest, getting rid of the old forest and allowing a new growth to come in. So it's not a problem until it starts to threaten people or property or spread to areas that we don't want it to spread to. And so the objectives always follow the idea that it's a simple solution to a problem. And before someone jumps on me and says, well, it's got to be smart, no, it doesn't have to be smart. The objective must be identified first, then you make it smart. And this is one of the problems with SMART is I see instructors and students making everything under the sun smart, but tying your shoelaces, I can make tying your shoelaces smart. Securely tie the laces on both your left and right shoe before entering the incident scene within a 10-minute period. Okay, that's smart, but the reason we're here is not to tie our shoelaces. So we need to trace the objectives right back to the priorities. The strategies are how you're going to do it, and I always go for plan A and plan B, and the tactics are the resources assigned to get the task done. And with the tactics, I want to make it very clear, changing the resource does not change the strategy. So whether we're knocking on doors with police officers knocking on doors to evacuate people, or the fire department knocking on doors to evacuate people, or the Boy Scouts knocking on door to evacuate people, it's still the same strategy. Changing the resource does not change the strategy. All right, so whenever I deal with an incident, we need to take a look at the three sets of problems that occur. And I always put them into three categories. The problems created by the hazard itself. These are the, threat to life. This is the wires down. This is the fires. And the way to understand these is these occur before any response begins. They are usually in place before the response even starts. Second of all, we're going to have a series of problems, which are problems with the response. And those problems do not appear until the responders appear. And as soon as they appear, then all of a sudden we start getting a whole bunch of problems that are specific just to the response. And the third set of problems are what I call outside the tape. And these would be problems associated with other priorities, such as political priorities, religious priorities, cultural priorities, business reputation priorities. Any other priority that is outside of the three ICS ones is not my problem. It's still a problem, though, but I'm not going to deal with it. And so the incident, we may have a hazardous materials incident, and that means we need to set up a perimeter to keep people from coming in. So we block off roads and stop people coming in. Well, what about all the traffic outside of that incident scene? The traffic disruptions may be massive, but it's not my problem. It's someone else's problem. So the solution is different for each one. The problems created by the hazards, the threats to the three priorities, are done by objectives. In Canada, if it is a problem associated with the arrival of the responders, we don't have food for the responders, we don't know which responders are on scene, we don't have timesheets for everyone, no one's keeping records. Those are independent of the problems created by the hazard, and quite frankly, we've got a solution for it called the org chart. Every box on the incident command org chart outside of operations fixes problems created by the responders. And the last one is the problems that we're not going to deal with or should not deal with. I'm going to put down on the 201 briefing form, and I'm going to put them under actions taken. And what that says is I acknowledge that it is a problem, but it's not my problem. It's not for me to deal with. I need to give it to a more appropriate party. And so those ones, I will make a note that I gave it to the dispatcher, I gave it to the emergency coordination center, I gave it to the politicians to make a decision on, but whatever the problem is, it should not be dealt with by the incident commander. All right. Events and activities. Now, one of the things that really gets me is that with events, we do a lot of ICS for events, but immediately as soon as you say we're doing ICS for events, everyone starts saying fire, police, and ambulance. And it's not just the public safety aspect. When we're doing ICS for events, we're going to need to use a different terminology here. So we're not going to use the term objectives because incident objectives deal with the impending threats to the priorities. So we would never run an event if there are threats to the priorities. If there's a thunderstorm coming, severe weather, tornado, you don't run the event. You cancel the event. So an event is never run if there are threats to the priorities. So we don't have objectives. And the purpose of the event is not fire, police, and EMS. It is not automatically a terrorism situation when we have a children's birthday party. So what I try to do with the instructors in Canada is put more emphasis on events, have activities. Those are the things to see and do. Why are we running a rock concert? People want to buy t-shirts and they want to listen to the music. Why are we going go-kart racing? Well, we want to have some fun. We want to speed around a track. Those are the things to see and do. And the safety aspect is important. We're going to always include safety, but safety exists just like the priorities do before, during, and after any incident or event. So what we need to do is talk about safety as mitigation, and that can only be done when you know what the activities are going to be. All right, so we got an idea of some of the terminology that I'm going to come up with or use here. So let's give you two examples. And these are concrete examples of using ICS within the amateur radio world. And the first one is Get Ready in the Park. This is a Emergency Preparedness Week display that is done every year, unless there's COVID, of course, where different organizations are allowed to bring their toys and bells and whistles. We have helicopters, and every one of the organizations gets a tent, a table, and 2 chairs, and they're allowed to present to the public, and the public come down for the weekend, get to tour the different displays and get to talk to the people involved. And so with amateur radio, we were going to do a preparedness in the park. And it started off with just trying to say, well, we need to do ICS, so let's do an ICS course. So we took our amateur radio operators and put them through an ICS 100 and 200 course just to get them used to the terminology and so on. And then we wanted to actually put it to use. Now that we've taken the training, how does that apply? And so we thought the preparedness in the park or Get Ready in the Park would be a good time to practice what we were talking about. And the first thing is that we need to understand what would we like to show. And so this is actually getting ready with the amateur television, where we're going to show the public that we can do live broadcasts over the amateur radio. We started off with obviously VHF, UHF. We want to have 80 meters, let people see how we do the 80 meters, APRS, and in amateur television. So we started to list all the things that we would like to do. But then along with that, we needed to put them in order of priority because we may not have enough people to do each one that we would like. And so this is where the priorities not only tell you what to do in emergency management, but they tell you which one comes first. And that is important because if you don't have enough resources, then you have to start picking and choosing which ones come first. And this is one of the phrases that I use in my courses all the time. I tell the instructors or ask the instructors, what do you call an incident objective without any resources to get it done. And they all think for a second, and then someone will say, it's a wish. Yes, it is a wish, and we need to understand that any objective or any activity must have adequate resources to get it done. So we put together our wish list, and then we assign the amateur radio operators to do it, and then we assigned the appropriate support, a number of people to support all the activities. In addition to just the activities themselves, we've got responders on scene, so what are the problems with the responders? And so about 11:30, along comes Pete Mueller from the city of Edmonton with 2 bag lunches, and he comes up to our tent with the table and 2 chairs, and he looks around and he goes, holy smokes, how many are there? How many people are here? Because he sees a sea of yellow vests for the amateur radio. And right away, our resource unit leader says 53, because that's the role of the resource unit leader, is to track everyone on the incident. And he's holding the 2 bag lunches, and he says, but I don't have enough food for everyone. And our food unit goes, no problem. We've got food for everyone. That's the role of the food unit. And as a matter of fact, we had breakfast for everyone at 7 this morning before we got set up. And we rented a campsite and or one of the picnic areas for groups. We got the permit and we fed everyone breakfast, and now we're getting ready with lunch, and it will be brought to everyone. And Pete is looking around and he's going, but you've taken all the parking for the public. And our ground support unit leader says, no, we've actually got off-site parking for everyone, and we've got 2 shuttle vans, and with the APRS we can show people where the vans are at any time, and for the amateur radio operators, they know when they're going to be picked up or how far away the vehicle is. For the public, we can demonstrate the role of APRS for tracking individuals or vehicles. And then the last thing was Pete turns and looks at the tower that we've got up and said, but you've got a tower here. And our safety officer says, yes, and we've got all the permits for it. We had a professional on the team that helped set it up, and we've got the permits. It's been safety inspected, and we've got a assistant safety officer to ensure that the public don't get wrapped up in the guy wires, stay away from the marked area to keep everyone safe. And so that was the activities using ICS to drive both the what we're there for, what we want to show, but also the support in order to get it done. And Pete's comment at the end of the day, you guys know what you're doing, don't you? And that was very important for us because of the next thing that came up. I'm sorry. This is the org chart, just so you can see the use of the incident command system. So we had a safety officer. We had the assistant safety officer for the tower. We had the doers, the operations section, doing the different displays. We had a resource unit along with the planning section chief. We had the logistics and food unit and the ground support with the vans, so we weren't taking up parking. And because we're volunteers, there was no finance involved. We were getting it out of our own pocket. And we didn't need a supply unit under logistics because each one of the activities that we were doing were required to bring their own stuff. All right. A few months later, along came this mess. This is a recycling plant fire, very significant fire, toxic smoke, and the issue with this started off actually before this incident even came along. Was our municipality, the city of Edmonton at the time, said, don't come unless we call. And I was working with Aries at the time, and I said, why would you call us just to confirm? Why do you think you're going to need us? And Bob, the director of emergency management, said, well, we'll need you because communications has failed. And I said, so you'll call us when communications has failed. Do you see the problem? And Bob goes, oh. And I said, so here's my suggestion is that anytime we hear of an incident, we would like the ability to come into the Emergency Operations Center and set up the amateur radio room. We would like to be able to contact you and just say, do you need us, and get a sense. And we shouldn't have to wait to be called, because by the time you call us, it's going to be too late. So we would like the ability to send one person in at any time. And if you don't need us, you say, we're okay. And so that was the agreement. So when this incident arose, I just happened to be in the building where the Edmonton Emergency Operations Center was. And so when they activated, I went right into the amateur radio room, got on the radio, and activated our members. And now our understanding of ICS starts to come in. The first thing is, we said to our members that if we activate, the first thing you will do is get a cup of coffee. And that was one of the best pieces of emergency management advice that I've ever had, was slow down, think about what you were doing, and get ready, because you may be gone for hours or days. Don't just jump in the vehicle and go. So no matter what the incident is, I actually set the kettle to boil and start making a cup of coffee. And then I start working through a checklist of what is the weather like right now? What is the weather likely to change to over the next few hours or next couple of days? Am I ready for the weather? I always carry a flashlight with me at 24 hours a day. I dump the batteries. Even if I changed the batteries yesterday, I will dump the batteries and put fresh batteries in, because you never know how long you're going to go for. I make sure that I check my gear. I make sure that my dog is taken care of. And so we've got this whole activity. And one of the things is, the unique aspect of amateur radio for incident command, a staging area is where available resources are going to be kept ready to go for any objective that is required. Well, amateur radio is unique because we do not need a physical staging area. We can stage on a frequency, which means that any one of our members can stage at work, at home, at the park, in their vehicle. It doesn't matter. We put in one requirement, though, is that if you're going to say that you're available, just like a staging area, you must be able to deploy within 3 minutes. Just like a staging area on any incident, the responders there must be on the road to any deployment given to them within 3 minutes. Next thing we did was we set up a whiteboard beside the amateur radio room. And on the whiteboard, we said we need to provide information. And it's not just for the public. This is not a media role. Information must be given to the responders. And I didn't realize how important this was until we set up our whiteboard and put it in action. And what we do with our whiteboard is we say there are 3 types of information, possibly 4. One is, what is the incident? The second one is, what are we doing about it? And the third one is, what do we need the public to do? And we just put those columns right up. And then every one of them needs to answer who, what, when, where, why, and how. And so who on this incident is who is immediately affected. What people, what residents are immediately affected. What are they threatened by? So we've got both the fire and the toxic smoke and the risk of explosion from a mix of hazardous materials. When did this start, and when did we update the report? Where is this, and what is affected by it? Why did this occur? Doesn't matter why it occurred, it just is occurring. And how, probably leave that one blank for the first little bit. All right, now the amateur radio response. Again, who? Amateur radio emergency service areas volunteers. What? Are on standby. When? Now. And we put a timestamp on whenever we update it. Why? In case of communications failure. How? By being ready to deploy within 3 minutes and then checking in when you're available. And then we go into further ones like what do we want the public to do? What are the emergency services doing? So during this incident, I kept on having the City of Edmonton planning section chief coming in, looking around the room, taking notes, and then disappearing. I finally went up to him and I said, what are you doing? Like, you keep on coming in the amateur radio room. Most people ignore the amateur radio room. And he said, you're the only one who's posting any information. We have absolutely no idea what's going on. The incident commander isn't telling us what's going on. And you're the only one that seems to have any information. I don't even know which way the smoke is blowing. And I said, just hang on. I got on the air and I said, the station's out at the scene. I need an indication of which way the smoke is blowing, how thick it is, and is it impacting any areas? Are there any effects that we need to be aware of? And right away, the amateur's on the scene. We've got heavy black smoke. It's going up about a 45-degree angle. It is crossing Highway 16. The yellowhead, but it is not blocking visibility, and it is going into an empty field right now. And the planning section chief said that is the first information we've received in the site for over 2 hours. So we assume that the emergency services are going to be providing information. They don't always do it. One of the things that amateur radio does is can warn the severe weather spotting during the summer, and I know in the United States it's Skywarn. This is a great way to practice your skills and start to apply ICS. So one of the things that I do is make sure that, okay, we've got the contact with the weather office. Let's make sure that the communications work. So I phoned through to the private number and asked for a spot weather forecast. And they said, oh, it's a good thing that you phoned because the wind is going to change direction by about 180 degrees in 2 hours. So I went back to the planning section chief and said, just to let you know, the wind is about to change by 180 degrees in about 2 hours. And he said, don't even joke about that. That'll blow it right into a neighborhood. And I said, that's exactly why I'm bringing it to you. And he said, where are you getting this information? And I said, well, I've got a contact with the weather office, and I just got a spot weather forecast. Here's the phone number. Here's the person to talk to. And so I provided him the information, and he came back after a while and he said, if you hadn't told us that, we would have been completely blindsided. Thank you very much. You have no idea how much that helped. After a while, yes, the wind did change, and we had to activate our, we started to look at limited evacuations, and so the city decided to set up a reception center. So the director of emergency management came up to me and he said, we're going to start evacuations. Can you establish communications at the reception center? And I said, yes. And he said, how long will it take you to get them there? I said, they're already there. And he said, at the reception center? I said, yeah. And he said, we haven't even decided to open the reception center. How can they be there already? And I said, well, amateur radio, if communication fails, it's either going to be a big bad event, which means it's either an evacuation, at which point we're going to be needed at reception centers, or it's going to be a mass casualty incident. And this is not a mass casualty incident, but if it was, we would be deploying to the hospitals because that's where one of the biggest communication failures occurs. And so he said, well, how did you know which reception center to go to? And I said, it's going to be the nearest one to the incident scene that is not going to be affected by the wind. So it's this one on your list right here as part of your plan. And he said, you're absolutely correct. After the incident, the director of emergency management came up and he said, could you have handled one more task? And I said, absolutely. What was it? And he said, the incident commander lost all communications. Could you have provided communications for the incident commander? And that is a loaded question, because no incident commander in the world wants a volunteer amateur radio operator on their hip. So the question is not just can you do it, but can you do it without ticking off the incident commander? And I knew exactly who I would have put. It was James VE6 SRV. Would have been great. He understood emergency management. He would have stayed out of the way, but he would have done exactly the role that would have been required. And I said, yes, I have someone who's pretty good. And the director of emergency management said the incident commander had dead batteries on 2 radios and 2 phones. The volume of traffic was so much that it used up all the battery power, and he didn't even realize that he had lost communications for a while. And I said, we could have handled that. At which point the director of emergency management said, you guys know what you're doing. Well, that's how you apply ICS for an activity and ICS for an incident. And you need to be as good as the emergency services, or even better in your understanding of ICS, in order to have the credibility and to be accepted within the gang, within the response, and be called out on a regular basis. All right, now we're going to get into the ugly part, and that is disasters. And I teach a lot of ICS 400. I love teaching ICS 400. This is the level that I operate at. I don't deal with garbage can fires. I probably wouldn't know what to do. But when it comes to disasters, this is my baby. And I was teaching an incident command course in the United States, and I had a fire chief, a senior fire chief, had been around for years. And as I went through the ICS 400 materials, he had his arms crossed and he was not happy. He was not having anything to do with it. And I saw his body language, and finally I said, what's the problem? You know, you're not buying this. You're not engaged. Why not? And he said, when would I ever split an incident in 2, or why would I ever have 2 operations section? This just doesn't make sense. This is useless. And I finally picked up one of the problems with how we teach ICS 400. And the problem is that most people have never seen it. They've never seen anything bad enough before to really know what this is all about. And so I pulled up another slide deck that I always have on disasters and started to show the pictures of what I was talking about, what we're dealing with, some of the issues that are going to come along the sites and scenes. And boy, oh boy, his arms uncrossed, and he started to get engaged. And at one point he said, I've never seen this before, have I? And without even thinking about it, now I said, and I hope you never do, because this is going to be your worst day ever and the worst day for your community. We need to understand that disasters have got a series of characteristics that are completely different than emergencies. Emergencies, we deal with the 3 priorities. We hire for emergencies. We train to deal with emergencies. We equip for emergencies. Our plans and policies and procedures are all set for emergencies. And we even have pre-planned objectives for the emergencies. And so the issue is that the arrival of the responders in an emergency, the emergency services will make it better. This is not going to work on a disaster. Now let's show you what I'm talking about. So the characteristics of a disaster: the scope is not known. Communications will fail, and there are 60 different ways that communication will fail. You think you've fixed one, you got 59 other failures that you never expected. The emergency services themselves are affected. You're going to require an unusual response. You're going to be looking at things that you will never see again in your entire life. You're going to use volunteers, whether you like it or not, and the emergency services are not trained on how to use volunteers. The situation will be constantly changing. Things go wrong, and people take pictures of poles. And that last one is a bit of a joke, but it's a catch-all. There will be some characteristics that you don't see on emergencies, and I throw all of those rare ones into people take pictures of poles. So this is Joplin with the Joplin Tornado. I believe that was about 2011, and the scope will not be known. You can look at the incident. You can take a look at a disaster and never know the worst hit area because you can't see it all and you can't travel around, you can't walk around. Even an aerial view may not give you the worst hit areas. And so this is one of the problems with any disaster is the worst hit area quite often is the last to be responded to because it's hit so badly that no one is able to scream, and that's because the communications has failed. The Edmonton tornado, F4 tornado that hit in 1987, the worst hit area with the most fatalities and injuries did not get any response for over an hour. They heard the sirens go into every other area where the tornado touched down, but it was no response for them because they had no communications left. The emergency services will be equally affected. This is Slave Lake, 2011 as well. And on this one, this is your emergency operations center. This is a picture. The people inside the building do not realize that the building is on fire and that their lives are at risk. And why not? Because when the whole town is on fire, there is smoke everywhere. The alarm systems are shut down because it's just constant ringing and clanging. The water pressure has died on the sprinkler system because of the firefighting efforts. And inside the emergency coordination center or emergency operations center, quite often the windows are closed so you don't get distracted by what's going on outside. So the people in this building have no idea that the building is on fire. Someone ran in, told them the building was on fire. By the time they gathered up all the maps and computers and equipment and opened the door to get out, the exit was blocked and they had to blow off multiple fire extinguishers just to get out of the building. Welcome to disasters. Things are constantly changing. This is again the Joplin tornado, and this is the second storm to come in. Just because you've had a tornado come through and wipe everything off the face of the earth, you've got people trapped, you've got people dying, and yet that doesn't stop the weather from changing. So this is the second storm, and during the second storm, a police officer was killed by a lightning strike. And this is one of the things where in the classroom we say, oh, ensure the safety of the responders. We need to understand that we're putting responders back into danger. We're consciously and deliberately putting them into danger every time we ask them to respond. So we need to be aware that responder safety we sometimes treat as simply a slogan. There's much more to it, and we need many more mechanisms. Just simply putting on the front page of an IAP, responder safety is number one. Here's an example of some of the unusual response and the use of volunteers. Many of the people in disasters are transported by private vehicle, and this is where the hospitals get overwhelmed, and this is why I like to have amateur radio consider going to a hospital during a mass casualty incident, because everyone in the emergency services assumes that the injured people will be arriving by ambulance. You will never have enough ambulances. The ambulances aren't on scene, and people just load up all the casualties in trucks, pickup trucks, dump trucks, wheelbarrows, and they go to the nearest hospital, not the best hospital, or not the hospital with the most capacity. So we need to start thinking about where do we need the communications. And just because the emergency services don't like people coming by private vehicle, welcome to disasters. They're going to come whether you like it or not. I love this picture. This is the Joplin Tornado as well. And how do you clear the roads to get the emergency vehicles through and rescue people? Well, when every piece of heavy equipment is digging people out and every tow truck has been destroyed by the tornado, you might end up with an unusual response. In this case, the circus was in town. They used elephants to clear the roads for at least a few hours or a day until they could bring in tow trucks and heavy equipment from outside. And anytime someone says that would never happen, I bring out pictures like this and say, this happens all the time in disasters. So just an example, this is Washington State. You got the year where you had multiple wildfires. Every one of these complexes, you'll see the term complex on the map here. A complex means that you've run out of incident management teams and you have assigned one team multiple large incidents to deal with. This is one of the years where they ran out of responders. One of the incidents said we need 200 firefighters. They got one. And at that point, you start using volunteers. The state of Washington called for volunteers to help fight the fires. You don't see that happen in emergencies. And people take pictures of poles. I've got several hundred pictures of various incidents where people take pictures of the poles. The issue is that every pole that is down is an indication that people are dying and lives have been destroyed. This particular picture, 174 people died in the incident. All right. So when you're thinking of a potential dam failure and you're going, oh, this is a bad day, that is one incident. We need to take a look at disasters are much more complex than just simply one incident. So where is the inundation going to cover? It's not a straight circle on a map. We need to evacuate multiple areas. But what happens in South Carolina in 2015 when not only are the dams threatened, we've had 14 dams fail all at the same time? You're going to need multiple responses. So here's the dams being overtopped, and when they're overtopped, they start to fail. But what if that is just the start? In that particular incident, 62 dams are all at risk of failure. Now, how do you organize your response on that? And it gets worse. Over 1,200 dams were of concern. How do you deal with 1,200 dams all potentially collapsing at the same time? You get very large incident management teams. I love the comment from one of the people that was on the Deepwater Horizon. Any incident where the President of the United States is on the org chart is not going to be a good day. You're going to have multiple priorities and multiple things that have to be dealt with, multiple problems, sometimes multiple responses. And now we need to even realize that it can get worse. And these are what I call the type 0 incidents. These are the catastrophes, and in these cases, people may never, ever go back. So how do you respond to an incident like this? And again, we're just looking at the anniversary of the Japanese earthquake and tsunami. And this is where we've got multiple cities have been devastated. Now, start to organize your response on this. The earthquake knocked down multiple buildings. We had buildings down all over the place, and when the buildings collapse, you start getting multiple fires. So we've got fires all over the place. How many fire trucks are you going to need to put out all these fires? And the problem with the Japanese earthquake of 2011 was that it wasn't just the earthquake, it was the tsunami. And so now we've got the issue of the tsunami occurring. There's your responders. The emergency services are not only affected, they have ceased to exist. You're on your own. What are you going to do now? And so with this particular incident, we've got whole cities that people are on their own and there's no response, and you need to start sorting it through. This is a completely different city. Okay. Just when you think it can't get any worse, things change and the situation gets worse. This was the snow that occurred after the tsunami. So not only have you got people trapped under the wreckage and people without any homes, but now it snowed. And if you think it can't get any worse, we've got the Fukushima nuclear plant. And at this point, you're probably shaking your head going, how does it keep on getting worse? How do you respond to that? Well, that's the nature of ICS, is just when you think you got your feet under you, this is 2 days or a couple of days after the tsunami and the earthquake and the Fukushima, they had the volcanic eruption on top of all the other things going on. And those are what I call the type 0 events, is the Fukushima and some of the cities that were destroyed, people will never, ever go back. ICS is going to struggle to deal with something like that. And so to end off the presentation, I just want you to understand that there's only so much we can do, and I'm going back to the picture of Joplin and the Joplin Tornado. There is no response here, and there may not be a response here for hours or days. So what do you do? Where do you start? Well, start somewhere. Start doing anything, because doing anything is better than doing nothing. And what you do is you establish command for what you can see and what you can control. Start with someone in charge, because when you put someone in charge, then people naturally start to follow the leader. Leadership is infectious. Second of all, start with the priorities and understand the priorities always tell you what you must do. Where do we start? Well, if we've only got limited resources, let's start saving lives. So treat the injured, find the trapped and get them untrapped, and follow the priorities, because the priorities are set by society. I said that earlier. It's not ICS that sets the priorities, it's society. So when you say we're going to start with saving lives, we'll treat the injured, we'll get the people that are trapped untrapped, then people will start to follow you naturally. Be methodical. Go through and don't just willy-nilly check the area. Set people and say, you search this area here, find out how many people are trapped, how many people are injured. If they can move, bring the injured over here. If they can't move, we'll treat the injured over there. Go to this area, do a thorough search, and then once you're complete, report back to me, move on to the next area. When you start doing this, eventually you work out from what you can do to further and further. You will start running into other responders and other organizations doing the same thing. And when you meet up with them, then you decide, okay, how far are you? Who's in charge? Can we keep on moving out? And so you start organizing a larger response by finding out who else is out there. Keep on using the 14 principles of ICS. They will keep you in good stead. And if you have practiced them on an activity like a preparedness in the park or small events, you just get used to doing them second nature, and now they will come naturally. And last of all, keep learning, because whatever you learn with ICS, whatever skills you learn with amateur radio, you'll be able to use them for the future. Which brings us back to the original slide, ICS. The concepts are simple, and it seems that they can be. Focus on the priorities, work on your management by objectives, use the 14 principles and features, use the doers, the getters, the thinkers, the payers, and I will give a call out to the ICS Canada website. It is www.icscanada.ca, and on that there's a tab with additional resources. We've got a whole bunch of tips and techniques that you can read some more. We've got videos to help teach ICS, and we will be adding to the ICS Canada site. It is an excellent resource for people who want to know more about ICS. Even though the ICS concepts are simple, understanding ICS takes time. Don't expect that you're going to just pick it up right away and be able to do it immediately. I've been doing ICS for about 20 years, and I'm still learning every day things I didn't know or better ways of instructing. So don't expect it will come immediately. It takes some practice. And with that, we'll leave it. If you've got any questions, I'm available for the question and answer.